Hi, I'm Cheryl Belson with American Sewing Guild, and I am thrilled to be joined today with Olivia Mears, also known as Avante Geek, for a new episode of Fireside Chats. I was recently introduced to Olivia when I bumped into an article celebrating her work with Ripley's Believe It or Not. She's best known for her avant-garde costumes of popular fiction, her use of unconventional materials, and her viral food-themed dresses like the pizza prom dress and Taco Bell. Olivia also has designed for Disney's Maleficent, Mistress of Evil in 2019, and she's an official cosplay ambassador for Singer Sewing Company. She starred in commercials for Taco Bell. She's been featured on Late Night with Stephen Colbert and has presented at MTV's Video Music Awards. Olivia, that is quite an impressive introduction. I can't wait to dive into your world of costuming. So welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much too, Cheryl. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's dive right in because I'm so excited to learn more about your story. And I always like to start these fireside chats hearing more about how people started and made their journey to where they are today. So I understand that you started sewing at a pretty young age, but that it was the big closet heist of pillowcases from your mom's linen closet to make a Halloween costume that truly launched your love of sewing. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and the sewing journey that has unfolded since then?
Absolutely. I love telling this story because it has a very happy ending in, response to theft from my mom's closet. There was a character from a video game I really wanted to dress up as for Halloween, but no stores sold this costume. And the closest I could think of having it in the house was making it out of a green pillowcase from mom's closet that I could cut holes out of for the arms, kind of resew it in places to get a collar and tie a belt around it for this green tunic that was pretty much the main part of the costume. And of course, there was no hiding it once I was wearing it for Halloween, that this was the pillowcase and it was hers. And she thought it was really cute. And her response was to buy me my first sewing machine and had her friend come over and teach me how to use it.
That's fantastic. You didn't even get a penalty box on it, huh?
No, not to my recollection.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, and then since then, tell us how you've continued that journey into the costume designer you are today.
Of course. After that, I took some time to learn how to use the sewing machine. So I made a lot of teddy bears and pillowcases and plushies. And so I was giving those out to friends and teachers at my school for gifts. And that evolved into making doll clothing and making the clothes I saw from my favorite TV shows for my own dolls. And as I kept doing that, I realized I want these costumes for myself, not just for my dolls. And that branched into, more full-size actual costuming for myself.
How fun. And how did you learn to make those steps? I mean, costuming and sewing a garment is one thing, sewing a costume is another thing. How did you learn to make those steps into costuming versus garment sewing?
I am very fortunate that when I was taking these steps, YouTube was more and more of a thing, and everyone was sharing all sorts of things that helped me in little places. And there was a lot of winging it, and I can definitely look back at places where I'm hot gluing hems when I shouldn't have been. But little by little, I was just really determined to have something as a final piece that actually was wearable. And while not, very technical or the best or professional at all, that was kind of learned after the fact, once I could actually get something on the mannequin or on myself.
I love the courage and the lack of placing boundaries on yourself to just try things like hot gluing a hem. Oh my goodness, that's definitely not the couture technique for. Oh, that's great. Well, I'm really intrigued with your creative use of some really pretty unconventional materials in making your costumes. As a matter of fact, Taco Bell made a video with you back in 2015 that's posted on their YouTube channel, and that highlights one of your costumes that I think will be very interesting to our viewers. So let's take a look at that now.
My name is Olivia Mears, and I make wearable art. I've made dresses out of latex paint, wrapping paper, food wrappers, beer cans. For a lot of my costumes, I go by the name Avante Geek. This is my Taco Bell dress. This was featured in a Taco Bell commercial with me wearing it. These are wrappers for the Doritos Locos Tacos. For the sauce packets, I had to open them up and empty them out. And so for a while, the dress did smell a little saucy. My closest friends, they think I'm weird. My friends think I'm so weird, and it's great.
Olivia, that is an incredibly beautiful costume. And it's made from food packets, for goodness sakes. I can't even fathom how this came together. Can you talk about the design process that you used to develop this kind of costume work?
Yeah, it started with a sketch, and with everything I do, I tend to like to draw at first and kind of make notes of what materials can be manipulated in a way that will fit in with the design rather than distract from it, and how I'm going to attach it, if I can actually sew this or if it's going to need adhesives, and figure out some of that early on in the sketch before I start kind of sculpting and sewing something to be on the dress form. And it'll probably change from the original sketch, but I at least have these mental notes of what I'm wanting and what I think can work to form the final design. And so with a lot of the food wrappers, I knew I wanted them all to be folded up in kind of fan-like, so that they would create a visual pattern from far away that wouldn't just be, oh, those are food wrappers. But as you got closer, you're like, oh, those are food wrappers. And same for the little foil packets that I opened up and had to clean the sauce out of.
I can't even imagine that, by the way. That just blows my mind.
Oh, yeah. If you get close enough, you'll know, because it still smells like sauce packets, or at least then it did. But yeah, like visualizing how I can put those on the costume without it just being glued on piece by piece, but they're overlapping in a way that forms other designs. And so there's kind of a floral design up close that if you look close, there's a color pattern of like vines through the chest piece. And little things like that just make me so happy to do, whether they're noticed or not. And so that, I think, is a lot of where my ambition for it comes from, is putting these little things into the costume that I know are there.
Wow. Now, on these food packets, was that all done with glue on a base, or was there any sewing at all to the food packet part?
There is a mix of both. When I first started making it, I did a mock-up with fabric for sure, and then kind of attached pieces with pins around that to make sure that it was going to still be the same form I wanted. The fans are sewn kind of in a line in, I think it's like 3 tiers, and they are sewn to each other basically, and reinforced with glue so that they don't start to rip as I wear them. And the sauce packets had to be glued down for sure, and kind of coated in Mod Podge to seal them flat. And behind them are just more paper wrappers.
Wow. And I have to ask, what does it feel like to wear this costume?
Yes, that is probably the most common question with anything I make. And for this one, it feels pretty great. It is always the noise that is the biggest difference with these costumes, because it's going to sound like you're walking through a pile of leaves and everyone's going to hear you.
That is great. I hadn't even thought about that aspect. I thought about it poking or something, but
so the bodice is basically paper mache to be able to get that form, and that really softens up the paper, and it kind of feels a little weird after a while because it is so stiff. But at first, it might just be that I'm used to these costumes, but I I don't really notice it too much. It's always the noise that is like, try and move slowly and not sound like a big pile of leaves coming through the house.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mentioned in my intro that I first learned about you when I bumped into an article that popped up in my feed one day, and it was about you and your connection to Ripley's Believe It or Not. So can you kind of tell us how that relationship came about?
Yes, kind of on the topic of the wrapping paper dress, uh, with the taco wrappers. This one, it's Christmas wrapping paper. And same thing, I kind of made paper mache bodices, and from there I attached more and more wrapping paper until it formed a full gown. And I did this using mostly leftover wrapping paper from the holidays. At least that's how the first one started. And then it became a tradition. And I would take wrapping paper that maybe was still left on the roll and put it all over a petticoat to get this big ball gown of paper. And I think I've done that 5 times now. Mm-hmm. And because of that, Ripley's noticed it, and it is in 2 of their books. Their most recent one, I have a 2-page feature of my wrapping paper dresses, and it's crazy to me, but those were so fun to make. So I'm glad that they're getting some attention.
Yeah, that is. You probably could be in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most wrapping paper dresses ever made.
That might be a true thing. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah, that could be your next big publishing. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Well, I'm curious if you have a favorite costume that you've made.
Oh, favorite costume. I think it would be I call it my drip dress. And it is made almost entirely out of dried paint. And the one I have now that has kept for, I think, 3 years at this point, is either the 3rd or 4th attempt at making a paint dress. The first one I made, I mixed paint with latex and peeled it off of wax paper around a mannequin and kind of used paint and glue to reattach those drips until it formed a dress. And I had a Velcro backing that would keep it all together, but the paint dried out pretty quickly and crumbled without any reinforcement. And so the second one I made it kept the wax paper on the back of those paint drips. So I kind of had to cut around all the drips. And that one still ended up crumbling. But the one I have now started with a cotton base that is just completely soaked in latex, liquid latex. And from there, I mixed latex and paint to then drip onto the dress, and still using some drips from wax paper, then put onto the dress so it has like little parts kind of spiking away from the dress that actually look 3-dimensional. Oh, wow. And when worn, it looks like someone has just dumped a bucket of paint on me, and it's just somehow turned into a dress form.
And this one has not crumbled yet, right?
Not yet.
And how long has this one been around?
I want to say it's at least 2 years. Time is weird for me right now with everyone.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But if I count last year, I'm pretty sure now that makes 3 years.
Yeah, I like what you just said. If I count last year, a lot of us don't want to count last year.
Right.
Oh, that is really fun. What I love about what you're telling us is I love the trial and error, and those first two paint dresses were stepping stones. They weren't failures. It was research until you find, how you're going to make these work. And it sounds like it's not uncommon for you to have to do multiple iterations before you find the combination that will work and stand the test of time enough to use it for what you want to use it for. Is that correct?
That is so true. Yes. There is a lot of practice and error and more practice. And there's been a lot of projects that I wouldn't say I've given up on, because I still hope to come back and finish them. But I just needed to take a break and kind of reset and come back. Sometimes it's felt like I've just wasted so many materials on this. But then, I come back even a year later, after all that time, I can come back and be like, wait, no, I know what to do with this now. I can make this, I can finish this. And I might end up tearing apart what I have and losing something that I've made, but I can still kind of pick it back up in pieces and build again.
That's fantastic. I love hearing about that aspect of your process. So, well, and this started out as just something fun and a hobby. And I understand that in 2019, costume design became your full-time profession. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what your costume business looks like. And since you mentioned we'd all like to forget last year, I'd also be interested in hearing, how did all of the quarantine and COVID impact your business? Did you have to pivot? How'd you pivot? So tell us a little bit about your business now.
Yeah. So in 2019, I was working just a clerical office job at a nonprofit. And I had, about a year prior, started a Patreon, which is kind of a subscription service for anyone who wants to support my work, and they get postcards and stickers in return. And that kept picking up. And I was just kind of doing what I loved and sharing it online, and it ended up building such a big brand for myself. And I'm incredibly lucky for that to have happened, with some of the pieces I've had that have gone viral and really kind of brought my account to a lot of people's attention. And so that picked up, and it got to a point where I realized I could actually live off of this and make this my full-time thing, and I could spend more time doing what I love each day. And so I went for it. It was kind of, if I have the opportunity now, I'm going to take it. And I'm absolutely glad I did that. I don't regret that at all. I will say the pandemic has definitely affected that, but I don't think it's for the worse. I think it's given me some time to kind of pull back a little bit after a year of really good full-time creation, and to look at my future steps. And I have a very big interest in costuming, but not just actual fabric manipulation, not just sewing. I like the design aspect of it so much, and I'm putting myself through kind of my own online classes to learn how to make designs within 3D spaces in games and software like that. So I'm very thankful in a way for what has happened, because it's letting me branch off into other directions that I know I at least want to explore. I don't know where that'll take me, but I'm glad to have that opportunity to see if this is really what I want to keep doing.
Well, and I'm curious, maybe it's pre-pandemic, but was your costume design getting a commission piece or commission work where someone would say, can you make X costume, and then you would design it and make it for them? Is that kind of what you were doing?
Yes, to some extent, because I'm one person, so I can only sew so much. But along with Patreon, because as things started picking up, I started getting more and more emails or requests from all sorts of people and companies for costuming. And sometimes they wouldn't quite match up with what I was doing, but other times it was absolutely perfect for what I wanted to create in that space. And so I would work off of contracted commissions with different companies and nonprofits. And I think I made some pretty cool things that came out of that, but also, it was nice to get paid.
Of course. Of course. Just to shift gears just a little bit. So in American Sewing Guild, we have chapters all across the United States. We have 130, 140. I won't get the number right, so I won't swear to it. But each chapter then has groups that either are geographically co-located or they're a special interest group. Several of our chapters have started a special interest group to focus on costume design. And one chapter up in Washington State has actually built their entire chapter around focus on costume design. I'm curious what advice you might have for those groups to help them continue to forge and get more engaged in the costuming community.
Mm-hmm. Personally, my community formed a lot from attending events that, even if costuming wasn't the focus, it was a pretty big involvement, such as Renaissance festivals, fashion shows, costume conventions. And obviously that's not very likely right now, but I would also suggest looking even on Facebook for costuming groups. And some of them can be very broad for just costuming in general, but a lot of them like to focus on period pieces, historical recreations, movie fans, and avant-garde. All sorts of groups exist out there. That's just people wanting to get inspired, see what other people are doing, show off, their work in progress, ask for advice. And there's some really good groups out there, and I'm in a few of them, and some of them I just kind of lurk and don't say anything. But I still really enjoy seeing other people involved with this, and that helps with my space too, in staying inspired. And so I would recommend just searching for what is online right now.
Do you have a favorite group or two?
There is one is kind of on the nerdier side of things. So there's a lot more focus on making kind of movie prop recreations and from cartoons and that kind of thing. But it's called She Prop, and it's focused on women in the community making, like big 3D elements that go along with costumings. And there's a lot of costuming in it, but it expands to basically full looks of people being like, you know what, I want to look exactly like Wonder Woman from this movie. How can I do this? And so many people will flood the comments to offer their advice. And it's great. It's super supportive, and you're gonna get what you're looking for if you go in there with that and just make a post.
Well, speaking of movies, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is you built I don't know if built is the right word. You created a Maleficent. Did I say it right?
Yes.
All right, Maleficent costume. And you actually, it sounds like you created it sort of like in real time live at a conference. Can you talk about that?
Yes. This was a lot of fun, and I'm really glad I had this opportunity, not only to go to New York Comic Con, but I went there as part of a Singer and Disney collaboration to bring me in to create during the event, starting Thursday through Sunday, from morning until the close of the convention. I was sewing and building a Maleficent costume live on the convention floor so that people could walk by. And, Thursday it didn't look like much, but then, they'd come by the next day and there's something on the mannequin now, and I'm still sewing away. And ultimately, in the end, the full costume I wore for parts of video that would be in a commercial to kind of promote the movie, and a little costume contest that Singer held with Disney for other people to make their own Maleficent inspired costume and win some really cool stuff from Singer and Disney.
How fun. How did that feel, creating in front with a crowd of people watching you?
I was really excited. And then as soon as I started sewing, I was extremely intimidated. But I think a lot of people really enjoyed that. And they also were just like, are you actually sewing the whole time? Like, yeah, I am. And it was a little daunting, but I actually really enjoyed having something to do at the convention. It's such a huge place that I think a lot of people will just wonder if they don't have plans. That's me. That is definitely me. So it was nice to have an objective. And have people come up and talk to me about what I was doing. That was a lot of fun. And I know a lot of people kind of just stood back and watched and didn't approach, but every now and then someone would come up and actually talk, and that was great.
That sounds so interesting. I've been sewing for a while, and I'm not sure if I would have been a little intimidated myself. So I give you great kudos and applaud your courage in doing that. So, well, this has been so much fun, I always like to hear, before we bring these chats to a close, what's coming up next? So is there something new that is looming that we could be watching for from Olivia Mears, Avante Geek?
Yeah, I've got a couple in progress projects that I've been sharing on my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And so I'm finishing those up pretty soon. One of them I'm using to make some Valentine cards that I think will be pretty cute, because the costume itself is that of a villain who is not very loving at all. But I think she's perfect for some very snarky Valentines.
Okay. So that I will look forward to seeing that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it sounds like from your previous comment that maybe looming on the horizon is a slight pivot in what you're doing, and maybe getting into the virtual costuming world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm really looking forward to that. I find a lot of software really intimidating, but I've been able to learn things like Photoshop and Illustrator almost on my own. So I'm convinced that I'll be able to figure out these new programs and start creating more computer-generated designs as well.
Well, I'm sure that your experience with creating costumes that are actually worn on someone will help you create a virtual look that's more realistic. So,
yeah, I hope so.
Well, we did a Fireside Chat with Susie Furter, and she did some workshops with some Disney animators to help them understand how clothing hangs on the body. And that was their goal. So it sounds to me like you've done the same thing. You've just personally experienced that, and now you're going to take it into the virtual world as well. So
that is great to hear. Yeah.
I'm sure you'll do great. And I look forward to seeing what that ends up looking like.
Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Well, Olivia, it has been so much fun to hear about you and to hear about your work. You are truly an inspiration and an artist. And I suspect that several of our American Sewing Guild viewers have had their creative juices sparked, if from nothing else, from the idea of trying to make a costume from food packets. That in itself is enough to ignite those creative juices. So thank you so very much for spending time with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Until next time.